So before we start, I'd like to thank all of you for being here. I'd like to thank all of you for still being here. With films like this, sometimes the running time is longer than the walking time. And I'd also like to thank all of the staff at the Cinematech for making this possible, and for ABCO for this gorgeous print and making this entire evening possible. So thank you all, but the largest thanks, I think, goes to the gentleman to my right, Tony Richmond, the cinematographer of the film, who has consented to be with us tonight to talk a little bit about himself and a little bit about the film. So thank you, Tony.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everybody.
So I'd like to start with the sort of origin story of you. It's what at the beginning of Catcher in the Rye he calls all that David Copperfield kind of crap. Okay. So how did you go from being the son of a taxi driver to one of the most respected living cinematographers?
Well, there's two things in my father truly loved. One was soccer, and the other was the movies. I wasn't very good at soccer, but we went to the movies once a week. And I just loved movies and was just taken back about the way they looked. And somehow I wanted to work in movies and work with cameras. And I managed to get a job when I was 16 in 1958 at Pathé News, running up and down the street with cans of film. And I graduated very quickly and managed to become an assistant cameraman, second assistant, which was in those days called a clapper loader. And through pure luck, I managed to work on some very big movies. I mean, the first movie I ever worked on was a movie called Call Me Bwana with Bob Hope and Anita Ekberg, which all took place in Africa, but we actually shot it in Black Park, which was near Denham Studios and Pinewood Studios. We never went to Africa. Then I got on to From Russia with Love. And then straight after that, I went on a picture in Israel called Judith, and that's where I met Nicholas Roeg, who was the cinematographer on the second unit. And I hung with his crew quite a lot because they seemed to have much more fun. And towards the end of that movie, we were in Israel for about 6 months. Nick came to me and said, I'm leaving. I'm going to do another movie. I can't take my operator and focus puller, but I'm certainly going to take you. But I can't tell you what it is. When I got back from Israel, it turned out to be Dr. Zhivago. So I went on that for a year as a second assistant. And unfortunately, Nick got relieved of duties after a month. And I wanted to leave with him, but he said, no, you've got to stay. It'll be good for your career. And I did stay. I didn't like David Lean because he fired Nick Roeg. And he found out about that. And he sort of took me under his wing. So I was really very lucky and learned so much from him, not only about filmmaking, about just, cinematography, editing, the whole shebang. And towards the end of that movie, bumped into Nick Roeg again, who was just about to start in Madrid where I was. A funny thing happened on the way to the Forum. So I stayed on with him and did that. From there, we went back to London and did the Truffaut picture, Fahrenheit 451. And then I became a focus puller on Casino Royale, the one with Woody Allen and Peter Sellers and John Huston and Orson Welles, a really crazy movie. And then we went straight on to Far From the Madding Crowd, where I was the focus puller on that. I'm trying to rush through this, it's not too long. And when that movie finished, Nicholas Roeg went to America to shoot Petulia for Dick Lester, and obviously I couldn't go in those days. And they wouldn't take me anyway. So I thought I'd be out of work. But John Schlesinger, the director of Far From the Madding Crowd, had a couple of extra shots to do. And I went and shot those with Terence Stamp, who was my best mate at the time anyway. And then that 6-day war started in Israel in 1967, and I went out a few days after that with John and Wolf Mankiewicz. We made this incredible documentary, which actually has disappeared from the face of the earth. And it was called Israel: A Right to Live. And when it came out, it was I don't understand why, but it was deemed far too pro-Israeli, which is sort of crazy. But just after that, John bumped into a friend of his called Basil Dearden, who was a very established and brilliant director in the 50s and 60s in England and made some wonderful movies. And he was going through a sort of midlife crisis. And John said, well, you've got to use this young cameraman I've got. He's wonderful. He'll help you out. He'll give you some some young spirit. So I got this call one night from Basil Dearden, and he said, I'm about to do a picture with David Hemmings. We're going to shoot it in New York, Beirut, and London. Would you like to do it? And I thought he was asking me to be the operator. And, I said, well, who's going to be the lighting cameraman, as they were called in those days, before they were called directors of photography? And, he said, you. I said, oh. He said, well, would you like to do it? I said, well, I've never done that, Basil. He said, well, do you want to have a go? And I said, yes. And that was that. And then this was my second movie. And so I was very lucky.
And this was your second movie, but how was it that you met Mr. Godard?
Oh, that's a strange story. I got a call one evening from this strange lady. And I say strange because she sounded strange. And her name was Eleni Collard. And she said, look, she was producing a movie. And she thought she might like me to do it. And would I meet her tomorrow night outside the Hilton Hotel at 7:30? So I said yes. Well, I got there early, about 7:15. I was standing outside the Hilton watching the men in the top hat and the red jackets open the car doors. And suddenly this monstrous Rolls Royce arrived. One of those jobs that had flags on the wings and a royal crest on the side, just like the Queen had, one of those big, really big ones. And the door opened, and I thought, who's going to get out of this? And the voice from inside said, Mr. Richmond, get in. And it was this woman, Eleni Collard, who was a strange little Greek lady. So we drove around for a bit, and she's telling me about the movie, but really not telling me anything about the movie. And I said, well, what about the scripture? Well, that'll come later. But do you like Jean-Luc Godard's movies? I said, yes, very, very much. And after about an hour, we ended up in Cheney Walk in one of those big mansions. And we got out, and she knocked on the door. And the door opened, and the butler in full livery opened. And we went up the stairs, as you did in those big mansions, up to the living room. And as we were going up the stairs, the air was very thick. And the smell of Lebanese gold was very rank in the air. As I walked in, there were the stones lying all over the place. And in the corner was Jean-Luc Godard. Well, I nearly dropped dead. And she took me over, and I just suddenly realized maybe this is the movie that they want me to do. And I sat talking to Godard, who didn't speak much English at all. Excuse me. But he had an assistant with him, who was his translator. And we spoke about movies and one thing and another, but not very much. And then he disappeared, and then she came back, and she said, well, Jean-Luc's going to leave now. And I said to her, is he going to make a quick decision? She said, yes, he wants you to do it. And that was that. So the next day, I get a call from the producers, went in and met them and did my deal. And then they said, he wants to prep the movie in Paris, so you've got to go out next weekend. So that was my meeting with Jean-Luc Godard.
Now, just to sort of set the scene for this, all of this is happening in that, Anno Mirabilis 1968, which I think is mythic for some of us who lived through it and may seem to be a myth for those who didn't.
Fantastic. Especially in London.
Yeah, and in Paris. As Bob Dylan says, there was music in the cafes at night and revolution in the air, and I think all kinds of wonderful marginal pieces of culture, like the people who were saying, take your dreams for reality, or underneath the paving stones is the beach. All of a sudden, we're in the very center of culture, and neither the Gaullist government on the right nor the Communist Party on the left knew how to contain this eruption of wild revolutionary energy.
Well, yeah, you could say that. I mean, it was a pretty wild time. I was really in the thick of it because my best friend at the time was Terence Stapp, the actor. He was a pretty big international star by that time. And we were just tooling around London with him in his Rolls Royce, which is really, really exciting. And in '68, there was a lot of things coming out of London. Music, they had the Beatles, the Stones, and all the other British bands. I mean, you had fashion, Mary Quant, you had theatre, you had Tony Richardson and those people making those kitchen sink movies. You had the top photographers, David Bailey, Brian Duffy, Terry Donovan. You had models like Twiggy and Shrimpton, and it was just an electric time. Because don't forget, London and England we just recovered from the war. I mean, we just recovered from rationing. So the freedom, but we began to be free again. It was really, really rather wonderful. But the extraordinary thing is, when I went to Paris and met Godard, they sent me out on a Friday night, and they said that he would call you and tell you where the meeting is. But if he didn't call you by a certain time on Saturday afternoon, forget about it, he'll call you Sunday. So I didn't get the call until Sunday afternoon at about 2:00. Went to his house, and I thought we were going to discuss the movie and the script, but all he wanted to discuss was how we were going to shoot the Stones, because we were they weren't doing it for us. They were actually recording that track, so we were doing it with them recording. So things had to be set. We couldn't move lights. We couldn't do anything. We just decided we'd have all these long tracks. But we didn't really know what we were doing. But one of the things, so this went on for three weekends. And what he wanted me to do was do some tests, and that was Barnes Recording Studio. Well, that was the first studio in England to have 24 track. And it started his life as a cinema, and then became a TV commercial studio before it became a recording studio. So it's very, very high. The ceilings are high. And we knew there was going to be no way we could rig it to light it in a traditional way. So he wanted me to do some tests. So I did some tests with fast black and white stock, which we were going to put washes on. I did some tests with recording stock, because in those days film was still, a lot of it was still being recorded optically. And while we were doing it, I sort of came up with this idea that I'd like to try it in color, which he didn't think we could do because it was such a big space, and film was very slow in those days. I mean, it was 50 A.S.C. So I got some wooden 2x4 battens and ran some cables across it and got the electricians to plug some photo floods in it and covered them with tracing paper. And we managed to get those up in the air, and it was very simple to rig. And we just had a little tiny area of the studio. So when Godard saw that, he loved it and said, "Can you do the whole studio like that?" So I said, "Yeah, I think we can." So what we did is we got hundreds of these 2x4 battens and ran them across the ceilings and put hundreds and hundreds of 500-watt photo floods in, and then covered them with lots and lots of tracing paper to give us that overall fill. Because, as I say, we couldn't move anything. That's why the tracks were so long. And there was no set plan for the Stone shoot, and we would get there maybe at 7:00 at night after these lights were rigged, and we knew where the Stones were going to be because Glyn Johns, the engineer, had set up the little booths where they all stand. So we knew Mick was going to be here, Charlie was going to be there, Keith was going to be here. And, that changed every day we were there, so that we'd have different camera angles. And we just did these rather long, extraordinary tracks, which, I think are absolutely fantastic, because I think the great thing about that part of the movie with the Rolling Stones is you really see a band's process of making a song, and that was a pretty good song.
And one of the things that I think Mick said in an interview is, they just lucked on that song. It could have been any song that they were recording in that time period. I mean, there's little bits of Stray Cat Blues and Jigsaw Puzzle in here, and this could have been about the making of Jigsaw Puzzle. But absolutely. I think just the stars aligned.
They certainly did. It was wonderful. It's still one of my favorite songs of all time. I think it's absolutely fantastic. Yeah. And I sort of knew the Stones prior to that because I was lucky enough to shoot a sort of video for them of Jumping Jack Flash.
So just to go back a bit, there's a bit of a backstory here. Godard came to London because he wanted to convince John Lennon to star in a biopic about Leon Trotsky. And spent a couple of weeks playing phone tag and meeting tag with the folks at Apple Corps, the Beatles company, not the worldwide computer and phone
$1 billion company.
Yeah, trillion, please.
Trillion, sorry.
Yeah. But it just didn't work out. He spent too much time cooling his heels, and it never gelled. And then here's Godard, who, according to his collaborator Jean-Pierre Gourin, really, in terms of the sex, drugs, and rock and roll of it, he really didn't enjoy drugs. Anne Wiazemski, who plays Eve Democracy, says his sex life was very Puritan. And it's not even clear he loved rock and roll. So what do you think brought him to this film?
Quite honestly, I have absolutely no idea. It's really extraordinary because the only simple thing about this movie was shooting the Stones, because we all sort of knew what we were doing. The rest of it, there was no script. I mean, it drove the producers crazy. There was absolutely no script whatsoever. And we just turn up at these places, and, you know, what would happen is generally the car, I lived in St. John's Wood at the time, a car would pick me up, and then we go to Godard's hotel where he was staying, and he'd get in with Anna, and then, you know, he smoked those Boyard cigarettes, which are very big, fat French cigarette in paper, maize paper, brown-coloured paper. And it was, when you open it, it was white on the back, and there was a couple of lines scribbled on the back of this. This is what we're doing today. I mean, and I had absolutely no idea what was going on, but I got to tell you something. I was so pleased to be part of it. It was absolutely fantastic. I mean, and also I loved Godard's movies. I think his movies were absolutely fantastic, and he, you know, he was such a, you know, a leader. I mean, he just was so great with the French New Wave, and just his movies were impeccable. And just to be around him was really fantastic. I mean, when we did those, you know, the shots with Anna jumping out of the car and spraying things, well, what would happen is we'd all meet in Regent's Park. The camera truck would be there. I get a little handheld camera out, and we get into his car with just myself and him and a focus puller and Anna and a driver. And he'd suddenly say, "Stop," and get out. I got out. He said, "You're there." I kneeled down on the floor. And then she'd run across the road. I had no idea what she started spraying these cars. But, I mean, we didn't get permission. They were people's cars, and it was real paint, you know. And we did that all over the place. And people thought we were crazy. We never got caught. But I did freak out at one time because, as I said, my best mate was Terence Stamp. And he came up with an idea that he would like to open a working-class restaurant on Fulham Road and get his mum to cook all the meals he had when he was a kid. It was called the Trencherman. But anyway, you see that suddenly we stop in Fulham, and she gets out, and we're facing the Trencherman. I said, "Oh my God, we can't do this." And anyway, we did, and off we went again, you know. But it really was a fantastic experience. I mean, it's something this movie is very dear to me. It's something I will remember, really, really remember. And, you know, it just was absolutely fantastic.
I may have the chronology wrong, but as I've read about it, the filming started in late April, early May, and then Godard disappeared for 3 weeks. And then...
Well, he did. What happened is we did the Stones, and we would you know, we'd get there 7:30 at night, and we'd work all night, you know, because that's when, and you never knew when they would come in. Anyway, what had happened was there was those riots were going off in Paris at the time, and on the last night when with the Stones in the studio, we were just doing a shot, you know, and suddenly there was a bang, and looked up, and the tracing paper was catching on fire. So the best boy electrician said, "Don't worry," he got a big ladder out and climbed up and took a fire extinguisher with him, and it went out. And as he was coming down, it was like machine guns, going bang, 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 bang. All these lights were exploding. The whole thing caught fire. So basically, we set fire to the studio.
So you almost killed all of the Rolling Stones and Godard in one evening.
Yeah, but I think I mean, you know, Godard loved it. He wanted to film it. The Stones were actually pretty stoned, and they didn't really care. They were just stuffing it. And my crew were saying, "Get the camera out," you know, as a camera crew were worrying about the camera. And it was a very big camera. We were shooting with a huge studio camera, like the one you see on the crane. That's the camera we used, B.N.Cs in those days with side finders. And what had actually happened, and then, of course, when the fire brigade came, they had to come in through the roof. What had happened is when they turned from a television studio into a recording studio, they had to put a lot of sawdust in there for the sound. So there was like 2 feet of sawdust or 3 feet of sawdust. And apparently what had happened, one of these lights had shorted out. The reason they shorted out was, what I told them to do was lay all these 2x4 battens and then use the porcelain bulb holders, you know, and they screw them in and it's all attached. They didn't do that. What they did is just lay the cable across the 2x4 and use the Bakelite ones, which you just punched into the cable. They weren't screwed in. So they must have caught fire maybe 2 or 3 days before and started to smolder. So that went off. So the fire brigade came in and they chopped through the roof, and the whole place was destroyed with water. And we were all outside, and Godard's assistant came up and said, "Jean-Luc's going back to Paris tomorrow. Don't tell anybody." Okay, fine. Because he spoke a tiny bit of English around me when no one was around, but he would not speak any English at all in front of the producers because he hated them so much, which I thought was really rather fantastic. No one, I'd never seen anybody behave like that before. I mean, the producers found out 2 days later that he'd gone back to Paris to help the students dig up the cobblestones to throw at the police, and he was there for 3 weeks.
And there's all kinds of things that happened in those 3 weeks. He did help the students discover the beach underneath the paving stones. He wanted to shut down the Avignon Film Festival and asked Francois Truffaut to help him do that. And Truffaut said, I hope they call the cops. And the two then didn't speak for decades. He famously issued a statement saying, culture is the alibi of imperialism, therefore we must destroy culture. So having done that in 3 weeks, he then came back to you.
That's correct. And we started off in that junkyard with the with those guys. I mean, spouting all that Elridge Cleaver stuff,
I think it's pretty, in 2018, it's very clear to look at the stuff going on in the junkyard and some of the stuff going on in the bookshop and see more than a hint of misogyny. How did that register 50 years ago as you were doing it?
Well, I really don't know, because I was always looking through that camera, not really listening to what they were saying. I was, because we never knew where we were. I mean, on those that bookshop was so hard because, we did it on a zoom with a camera that shouldn't really take a zoom. So I never knew where anything was. So we struck very lucky there. And that is Ian Quarry, the producer, who's reading Mein Kampf in the purple outfit. Yeah. He was the producer. God, I did not like him.
Now, as I understand it, when this film premiered in London, Quarrier had done a little bit of editing, and he wanted the complete song to be in the movie, as we saw tonight.
That's correct.
And changed the title from 1+1, which, what does that mean? It's something you might see scrawled on a wall, but it doesn't,
we scrawled a lot of stuff on the wall in this.
Yeah. So he changed the title to Sympathy for the Devil, which is more of a seat filler of a title. And Godard said to the audience, this is not the film I made. This is horrible. Anybody who wants to see the film I made, come outside and I will project it on the wall of the building, and then exiting, punched Quarrier in the mouth.
That is correct. But what actually happened was that, in those days, obviously, it was a purely photochemical process. I mean, you shot the film, they cut the film negative, and then you started making prints. And in those days, it would probably take, you do three mu prints, and then probably the fourth print would be the first married print, and then there would be tweaks, and you do the fifth print. So I did the fifth print, and it was fine, looked great. And then because Godard was never around for that, and about a week before the premiere, he called me, and with his interpreter, and said, "Are there any more prints?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "There's the married print, the fourth one, the one before, the one we've agreed on." And he said, "Is there any way you can get hold of that?" I said, "Yeah," because I knew the head of the labs, a guy called Les Ostinelli, who was a very good friend of mine. So I called him and I said, "Listen, Jean-Luc would like to see that print." He said, "Okay, come pick it up." Which, no one would do that now. So I went down to the lab and picked up all these cans of film, called Godard and said, "I've got it." And he said, "Okay, a car's going to come and pick it up," which he did. That's, never heard any more. And then as we were in the cinema, that's when he wanted everybody to go outside. And he unfortunately got booed. And but I don't think anyone, maybe people might have gone outside, but it was pouring with rain. And you know what the Brits are like. So he jumped up on the stage and popped Ian Quarry, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. I mean, it really was rather wonderful.
You worked with some extraordinary filmmakers before this, including, Nick Roeg and David Lean and Basil Dearden, and you went on to have what I think is one of those wonderful creative marriages with Nick Roeg. If I look at, Don't Look Now or Man Who Fell to Earth, both of which I watch and rewatch all the time, and I suspect there are many people here tonight who do the same. With a distance of now half a century, which is something I tremble to say, Can you sort of tease out what you learned from this particular film and this particular experience that you carried with you as you went on to all the work that you've done since?
Well, I think one of the, that's really hard to answer that, but I've always, since that movie, liked long takes and some scenes played in one shot. And I worked with a couple of directors that did that later on in my life. Blake Edwards, for one, I shot 2 movies for Blake Edwards, and he was a master of holding a shot for a long time. And also John Sturgis. And another great director I truly, truly loved was J. Lee Thompson, who directed The Greek Tycoon. Which also Alan Klein of Abco produced that movie. So, I don't know as I learnt too much other than that. But I mean, I think that one of the things I did learn, if you're on a tour, which of course Goddard is, you can get away with almost anything.
And as the lighting cameraman or cinematographer to an tour?
That I don't know.
Maybe now's a good time to just ask if anyone here has questions for Tony. Let's not see all the same hands.
Can't see any.
Yeah, there's someone there. In terms of what we're doing, is there somebody who will bring a microphone to him, or just project?
So you're talking about the A.S.A. for this film being, did you say 50?
Yeah, it was Eastman color, 52, 51.
So I'm imagining that well, one question, like, it must have been really bright in the recording studio.
It was. I mean, very, very bright.
So when you get to a film like Don't Look Now, what was the sort of technical aspects of the film that allow you to do the stuff that you did in that movie? Because that seemed to be a lot of handheld.
There wasn't much handheld not much handheld in Don't Look Now at all, believe it or not. And the film speed of that was 100 ASA, which we forced one stop to make it 200 ASA, because that was a really, really hard movie to shoot. I mean, in so much as just shooting a movie in Venice is virtually impossible. I mean, thank God we shot it in the winter when there was not too many people around. But I mean, it's so unlike any other way of working. There are no, you have no cars, you have no camera trucks, you have no lighting trucks. Everything goes by boat, and you'd be in the middle of a shot and you have all these lights going on, and suddenly they'd all go out, and there was a major panic because the electricians would have to get the barge from out under the bridge of the canal, because if they didn't do it before the tide came in, then you'd never get it out till the next day. Things like that, And that was really hard. And also, we had no condors like we do now. And if you wanted to light up, the electricians would put a ladder across the canal. That was very, very difficult. And that was a very short movie, and we shot that in 6 weeks. And I think that's, Nick Roger's directed a lot of amazing movies, but I think that is one of his best. That's almost his most, I think, accessible work. I think that was a wonderful movie.
Yeah. And decades later, people are wearing red raincoats on Halloween.
They are. And that movie still holds up, actually.
Yeah. Just to jump back to this film, it's very hard to write songs. It's very hard to refine songs. It's very hard to sort of figure out what's the groove you want and what's too slow and what's too fast and what's too emphatic. But the Stones were doing this also with very many very hot lights, hot enough to, ignite stuff, and a huge, blimped camera almost in their faces. Do you got any sense of how they felt about their creative process being invaded by even a relatively minimal crew, but with a lot of lights and a big camera sort of that far away?
No, I think I don't think they. No, I think they were very grateful that we were very respectful of them. I mean, the shots that were all lined up, the tracks, the dolly were all in position when they came in, and then they would begin, and we'd just suddenly start. But I mean, they apart from the camera moving around, I don't think they ever thought we were there. They were very easy to work with.
I mean, I think one of the things about musical documentaries is you tend to get the sort of perfected version of stuff, and all of the sort of failed takes and outtakes, are on the DVD extras. And what I love about this is that the process of getting to that place is there for you to see before your eyes.
Oh yeah, that's what's so great about it. I mean, also, if it were a film and they were doing it for us, they were performing for the camera, it would be different because you wouldn't have microphones in front of their faces, you wouldn't have light stands. I mean, it's as it is. It's just, that was really real, and I think that to see the process of this, of the making of this song, the recording of the song is great because. A little while later, I did Let It Be for the Beatles, and the whole movie, not just the roof, and the Stones process was totally different. And you can really see them all working at it.
There was a question right there. Yes, you.
I was wondering.
As loud as you can.
Yeah. Okay. I think your style for this film was a little bit abstract, and I was wondering how you were able to cope with that in terms of working with a director that didn't speak your language.
I didn't know what we were doing. I didn't know what we were doing half the time. I have to be honest. I mean, there was no script. He never discussed. We just lay a track, and suddenly, like when we were in the woods, we'd lay a long curved track, and we never rehearsed it. Suddenly, Eve Democracy pops out with that camera crew, and we just start shooting. And he would walk alongside the camera, very close to me, and like when we're in the studio, he'd tap me on the shoulder because he could look over my shoulder and see through the side viewfinder. I mean, there was no video monitors in those days, and that meant I would hold that shot, and when he tapped, I could go off somewhere else. And sometimes he'd tell the grip to push the dolly, and we'd stay static. And then I'd feel the dolly go, and he'd pull the dolly back, But no one, I presume he knew what he was doing. I mean, but I certainly didn't, and neither did anybody else, But it was really fantastic. I mean, to have that sort of, I don't think I've ever worked with a director that has had that absolute freedom as he did on that, I mean, the producers had no idea what was going on, but they were playboys. And Michael Pearson was a playboy. He was like 23 years old. He was Lord Cowdrey's son, and that's Lord Cowdrey owned that big Rolls Royce. He's now Viscount. Well, he's Viscount Pearson, but now I guess he's Lord Cowdrey because his dad died. And they were basically Ian and Quarry were doing the nightclubs and drinking champagne and smoking a bit of dope, and then suddenly they got into the movie business. And what a movie to start with. I don't think they've ever made a movie. Oh, they made one other movie. They made a movie in America. What was it called? With Chris Christopherson. Can't remember that. But that's about it. But I mean, it's embarrassing to say I didn't know what was going on, but that's the truth, But I think it turned out rather well for. I loved that crane shot. I mean, when we did the first time we did it, I cut it because I got the mic in. He said, no, I want the mic in. And he said, I want people to know we're making a film. That was him in the hat running across and throwing the blood, and screaming and shouting. It was just wonderful.
Question right there? Yes. As loud as you can.
Yeah. I have a lot of questions really about his intentions and temperament, like approaching a movie, because it seems like he's kind of like, it seems that he's very critical of America, like in kind of like a third cinema mixed with like the French New Wave. But I did want to ask you about your technique in the studio, because filming the creative process, the camera did have like a sort of space and like looseness to it. Very, very like, it's like ambiance, like the camera was, as it like drifted between the different members. So I wanted to know if he blocked the stones, or did they just, or did you just react with them?
Well, we sort of blocked it, as I said earlier, is that when we would get there on any given night, Glenn Johns, rather, the engineer, would set up the baffles, and we'd know that Charlie was in that baffle with the drums. We know that Mick was going to be singled in this one. Brian Jones was going to be there, so we knew where they were going to sit or where they were going to stand, and because that's where the mics were. And then once they came in and got started, we would just track around them. And as I say, that Goddard would tell us when to start the track, and he'd walk alongside us, and I'd pan to someone, and he'd tap my shoulder, and I held it, and then we'd go off somewhere else. So that really was the. There wasn't so much a creative process because, it had to be done very silently because, as I said before, we were shooting them recording, which is very different than if we were doing a movie like that, where they would be recording for the film for us. So that's why I think it became very fluid and very natural because, sometimes you're on the back of their heads for a long time, which I think is, it really is wonderful to be able to do that. Because there was no other way of doing it. And then we come round and then, you just pan across an empty room and there's all the electricians drinking beer up the back, And that's just the way it was. I know it's not a very good answer, but that's really all I can say. And it was ambient light, obviously, yes.
Just to go back to the first part of your question, to Godard, particularly at that time, and I think for the rest of his life, the USA was the belly of the beast. The USA was the country that was dropping napalm on Vietnam. And I think to the extent that there was anything here that interested him, originally it was, the inspiration of American B movies. Then I think the Black Panther Party and Black Revolutionaries, Eldridge Cleaver is quoted very extensively here. And a bit of the student movement. You see in one of those cards, SDS, which is Students for a Democratic Society, which was one of the larger student movements at the time. After this, Godard came to make a movie with a band on a rooftop, very much like Let It Be, called 1 AM or One American Movie, with the Jefferson Airplane on a rooftop. And I think he was trying to kind of grapple with his love-hate relationship with American culture. I think over the course of the long arc of time, he just decided, fuck y'all.
He was very, very, very left-wing.
Yeah, and no less so now.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
I noticed you didn't show the control room or any of the equipment, and you didn't shoot from the control room out towards the studio to see what the engineers were seeing. So
Didn't want to see that. He just wanted to solely stay on the Stones. And we all knew what engineers did. I'm sure everybody knows what they do. They mix it and that's it.
Poor Brian Jones seems to be in a sort of cloistered booth strumming an acoustic guitar, which never gets recorded or heard.
Well, he was pretty stoned most of the time. There was one evening or one night we were there. Godard's assistant comes in. He wants to talk to you. So meet him down in the men's room. So we go downstairs to the men's room. Maybe I shouldn't tell this story, but I will. Well, it's true.
That's why I saved the question for now.
And so we're having a pee together, and he's telling me something about what he wants to do next. And there's a terrible crash in one of the stalls. And the door opens, out comes Brian Jones. And he's got a hypodermic needle in one hand and a piece of rubber band in the other. They said, Tony, could you tie this around my arm? So Godard and I having a pee. I tied this around his arm and he went back to the stool, I presume, and shot up. But that's... he was pretty out of it, which is sad. Because he was a really nice young man, Brian. Really nice.
Were those the people who were gathered around doing the doot-doots? Was that Anita Pallenberg and Marianne
Pallenberg and Michelle Breton.
Michelle Breton, okay, cool.
And then, the guy on the piano was Nicky Hopkins, who's passed away. And the guy on the bongos, I think, has passed away. He was a very famous bongo player. I can't remember his name.
Rocky someone,
yeah.
We should find out.
But, then they also both played with the Beatles when we were doing Let It Be.
I think we have time for a couple of more questions all the way in the back or midway toward the back. Yeah, you.
I found myself really touched by this exchanging of cigarettes between between the two guitar players, between Brian Jones and. Did you notice that when you were doing it? Like that it was this kind of continuity going throughout the entire film?
Well, not when I was shooting it. I mean, I notice it now. But that's the sort of thing that people did. You know, we had a cigarette, you give your mate one. You don't light it for him. But I mean, it's just I couldn't see those minute details looking through that because I wasn't looking. I'm not looking with the B.S.C. You know, it's a rack over camera, so you're not looking through the camera when you're shooting. You're looking at a finder on the side, so you can't see anything really other than the frame line. But yeah, everybody smoked in those days.
Okay, one more question. Yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering. I didn't quite get that Godard was this the producer cut that he didn't like and he stormed out of the thing for? And how is his film different?
Yes, this is the producer cut.
Yeah, and how was the one that he wanted to show outside of the print that he borrowed?
Basically, it's the images are the same. Before we cut outside to the beach, the stones are all sitting on the floor, and then and the completed song is playing over those images, where they're not actually playing to the song; they're just strumming around, and that's it. And I sort of get why he was upset. I mean, he never told me what the movie was about, but I think I knew what it was about. I think it's about, well, obviously it's about destruction. It's obviously about art. But I think the thing that riled him most about the producer's version is that I think he felt that art is never finished and or never completed. And by playing the finished, completed track over those last images, it's saying the song is finished, and I think that's what got him. If that makes sense.
And I think I read at some point that for him to put the finished song in is like saying 1 + 1 = 2, which is just a piece of math, as opposed to 1 + 1, which leaves open-ended the possibility of music, aesthetics, and revolution.
I agree with you. Absolutely.
Yeah. We have a lot of thanks to give to the Cinematheque and its staff, to ABCO for doing this, for everyone who worked on this gorgeous 4K restoration. But if you'll allow me a personal note, I think in this industry there's a lot of premium placed on youth, which they think means inspiration and stamina. But then there's this other thing, wisdom, and I just want to say I do hope you make a whole bunch more films.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much for coming, staying. Thank you.